Hi, thank you all for joining me today. Last session of the 2 days, so appreciate you all coming. I hope you had a fantastic time to network and meet some new people. My name's Wizz. I'm the founder of a retail and brand strategy agency called Wizz & Co. I've spent 18 years in the retail industry. I spent 12 amazing years at Selfridges. I was head of beauty buying for a number of years, and then I was director of Soho House Retail, so Cowshed and Soho Home. And 5 years ago, I started my own business, where I work with global retailers. I've done work with Ocado and Next and Fenwick, big brands such as Dermalogica and Arabian Oud. And I've also worked with a lot of independent brand founders to helping them to scale their brands. I'm very much focused on how do you stand out in the market, how do you create the hype for your brand, and how do you scale that through kind of sales, marketing, different distribution channels. So I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. We've got time for questions at the end, or happy to take them afterwards as well. So what we're going to be covering today, we've only got half an hour, so I'm going to whiz through these very important topics, but I have included QR codes, whoever thought they'd make a comeback. But they are, so I've got some links on here as well, so there's more information to kind of either free masterclasses or guides and blogs as well for you to access more information that you feel is most relevant to you. So talking about the impact of digital fatigue and consumer overwhelm, what's important to customers when purchasing beauty, what marketing can you be focusing on to convert to sales? Should you be doing a D2C or retailer strategy? How to position your brand to stand out, and what to do to review your strategy to align your focus. So the impact of digital fatigue and consumer overwhelm. This is a hot topic, and I think we've all experienced it personally coming out of COVID, the pandemic, reintegrating ourselves back into lives, working back in offices, seeing all of our friends, travelling. There's a huge amount of, I suppose, overwhelm in general life, but also in kind of the digital realm as well. On top of that, changes to digital marketing, things happening on kind of different tags when you're doing advertising, updates to cookies, privacy, all sorts of things. As a result, it's getting harder and harder to get cut through online. And there is also an overwhelming amount of information out there, whether that's through advertising, it's through brands, it's through signs to put a mask on or whatever it is. There's a lot of stuff out there. Also with the rise of things like TikTok, it's great, but actually it's kind of really made our attention span a lot shorter as well. So it's much harder for consumers to retain information as well. And I think the biggest opportunity that you can be thinking about as a brand is really how can you build engagement with your customer. So how can you lengthen the amount of time that they're spending with you? My thing's getting put back. I'll start again. So how could you increase the amount of engagement time that people are spending with you? So if they're heading to your social media page, if they're heading to your website, how can you kind of create a story? How can you kind of build that engagement? There's a lot about that hook to kind of lure them in, to get them interested. But then also how can you continue to elevate an experience for them as well? What can you be offering them that's more than what they might be getting with other brands? And that could be through kind of events online. That can be education. People are looking for experts when they're purchasing beauty, and that could be expertise in a sustainable brand. It could be expertise in kind of doctor-led. It could be about the problem that they potentially have with their skin. It could be from a makeup artist that is kind of really, I suppose, elevating a trend that they see as well. So what's important to your customer, and how can you really start to engage with them with the problem that you're solving and the solution that you're giving with them, and how can you create deeper connections with them, because ultimately this is going to start to counteract some of that fatigue that people are experiencing and ensure that your brand is memorable as well. So what's important to customers when purchasing beauty? There's a big movement around conscious consumerism. People are really thinking about where they're spending their money, when they're spending it, and how they're spending it. And this is everything to do with kind of the ethics of a brand, to the impact of the current cost of living crisis as well. People are really starting to think about where they spend their money, and this is a lot to do with kind of how you align to their values as well. And people want to buy from brands where it's more than a product; it's an experience. It's something that they feel aligned to and passionate about. So it's really important to find out more about your customers. And I think we all know about kind of targeting a certain customer demographic, kind of finding out as much as you can, kind of creating a profile for them. But how can you go into much more detail about this? How can you think about how do they spend their day? Where are they buying their coffee from? What other brands are they purchasing from? What are they talking about with their friends? So more than their age and where they live and what magazines they read, kind of go into kind of trying to get a bit more kind of under the skin of how they're behaving and how they're feeling as well. Again, it's really thinking about how customers are feeling after the pandemic as well, and how they're feeling in kind of the current climate. There's a lot of people feeling quite overwhelmed, kind of restless, frustrated. So I think we can all, I suppose, feel an emotion ourselves, but it's also good to understand how your customer is feeling as well, because if you can understand how they're feeling, it's going to be easier for you to connect with them as well. So are your customers frustrated? Are they activists for change and are passionate about kind of something in particular that you can kind of that you're passionate about as well, and you can kind of connect on that level with them as well? Are people just super excited to be going out and kind of socializing again and looking forward to Christmas parties? People are in lots of different camps, and it isn't necessarily about communicating with all of them, but it's about finding which is your tribe, which is your community, and ultimately connecting with them on that emotional level is what people are wanting. They're wanting more from a brand than just buying a great product. So once you've found out what's important to them, really think about how this kind of really evolves into your mission, into your purpose, and how you communicate this to them as well. Because again, this will really start to impact them as well. And the biggest theme that I've been talking a lot with clients about, from talking at kind of one of the biggest FMCG groups about beauty and wellness to kind of some kind of fast-moving retailers as well, is kind of what is really defined as luxury. And I think we've always defined luxury before as a price point, but actually luxury is a moment in time. It's something that we can use intentionally, and I think beauty has really kind of a great category that can be deemed as something that's luxury. And we've seen the rise of brands like The Ordinary, The Inky List, which actually are luxury products, but actually a low price point. And I suppose that's a very obvious example. But actually in the pandemic, we saw the rise of bathing, for example, or kind of rituals around applying kind of face masks and face creams. And actually that's a real luxury. And all of those things are moments in time. And I think when we think about luxury, one of the biggest things that money can't buy is time. So again, this is something to be thinking about when you're engaging with your customers. If they are signed up to your email list, how are you serving them? How are you educating them? How are you, I suppose, rewarding them for giving over their valuable data? Because ultimately, they're spending time with your brand. So how can you reward them and use that to help build a really strong relationship? So thinking about what marketing will convert to sales, and again, I think there's been a huge shuffle in the industry. I've certainly seen it with a lot of clients and just people I'm chatting to, kind of at events. A lot of people were feeling very frustrated, and it's getting really challenging out there. As I said before, we're seeing the digital marketing trends that are getting harder to get cut through. But ultimately, what's really helping a lot of brands that I'm seeing kind of in clients is really adding in that human element. So it's one thing kind of being bombarded with messages, but how can you kind of create a face behind a brand? Founder-led brands have boomed for a reason. We're humans and we relate to other human beings. So having somebody who's a face of of a brand is hugely powerful. There's a lot of founder-led brands that are nervous about putting themselves out there. It can be quite a scary thing, but I would encourage you, if you are a founder, to see how you can start to put yourself out there. It doesn't happen overnight, but being more visible, talking to your customers, and maybe that's just creating intimate events for them. Maybe that's not about putting yourself out online yet. But how can you start creating that story? There's plenty of products out there, there's plenty of brands, but there's only one you. So that element of personalization that you can provide as a founder can be super, super powerful. It gives your brand a tone of voice, it gives a personality, and it creates authenticity and builds trust with the consumer as well, which is what is so important to people now. Brands that don't have a founder to kind of create that human connection, there's still lots of other opportunities as well. Ultimately, this was how the influencer was born. It was the big brands that didn't necessarily have somebody behind the brand, and it was finding ambassadors and people out there that could do this for them. And there's so many different ways that you can do this. It's about creating a community of your best customers. How can they be your ambassadors? How can they be kind of talking about your brand to their friends, to kind of other potential customers. We've seen a big boom with user-generated content, which I think is super powerful. And this is more than just reviews on your website that we all know that works. It's how can you encourage people to share before and after photos, videos of their experience, because ultimately this will stop people in their tracks. Algorithms on social media will always prefer to prioritize faces as well. So it's a really powerful opportunity. I'm really starting to think about some old school techniques as well. People are trialing lots of different things and having success. So sometimes kind of old-fashioned print, magazines that get delivered into your home is hugely powerful. For example, this just kind of elevates the experience. And if you get a magazine from there's lots of fashion brands doing it. I think it's happening less so in beauty, but I do think makes it even more of an opportunity. You deliver something through your door and you think, I'll read that later, and you've then got this element of branding that potentially sits on a customer's coffee table for a week before they get around to reading it. So if we think advertising is all about how many times people see you, trying to get things in print in front of people can be very, very powerful as well. So how can you add more experience to your customers as well? I also think collaboration is really key as well. So all brands are trying to access more customers. How can you collaborate with other like-minded brands that aren't in the same space as you? So could be within beauty, could be within wellness, but also maybe could be in fashion, could be more around lifestyle, and collaborate with those people and create experiences together. This has multiple purposes of getting in front of your ideal client. It can be a very organic way to kind of create new experiences, have new content to talk about, and can really start to create I suppose, a new tone of voice and a new angle for your customers to start to relate to as well. So it's really about kind of trying to think about some new levels that you haven't tried yet, and new opportunities for growth. So having worked in retail for many, many years, and obviously we've seen the D2C boom. People often say to me, well, what should I be focusing on? Direct-to-consumer or retailer strategy? Historically, we've seen kind of brands that do kind of one or the other and have had huge success in one or the other. And generally, it's where people feel most comfortable. And personally, I advise people to build your brand awareness, make sure you have some great traction and some great customer engagement, and then start pitching to retailers. You don't need to be stocked with all of the retailers out there. It's about having a strategic approach, because actually being stocked with some of the biggest global retailers out there, it will have a number of benefits for you and for your brand. There will be a big halo effect on your D2C kind of advertising profits as well. People will start coming organically to your social media. They'll start coming organically to your website. They may be purchasing through the retailer and from you directly as well, and vice versa as well. It's not about being with all of the different retailers. This can definitely be challenging, certainly in beauty where there's a lot of discounting out there. But making sure you're with the right ones in each territory can be really, really powerful. So I don't know how many people here are stocked with retailers. Love to show of hands. Amazing. Any just D2C? Any both? Okay, cool. So good mix. So having pitched to thousands times over the years, I'm going to put up a couple of QR codes here. One here. So if you're looking to pitch to buyers, this is a great guide here online. And if you want to increase your business with retail partners, do download this as well. And always happy to answer any questions. I do see when people go to launch to retailers, it can be a real wobble point for a lot of brands. Sometimes you'll pitch to somebody, to a buyer, you'll send an email and you don't hear back, and people can really lose confidence. So I'm really passionate about trying to help people navigate this as well and help them understand. So when I was a buyer, I got at least 200 emails a day, probably 10 new pitches. The reality of my job was I probably only had about 15 to 20% of my time to actually spend on looking for new brands. Lots of people think you're surrounded by beauty products all the time, it's amazing, and you're constantly sourcing the hottest trends. And you are, of course you are, but you're also trading the business as well, and you're working with all your current suppliers as well, and really trading the business with them. So you're very time poor, and if they haven't replied, it doesn't mean that the world's ended. It just means it's not right for them at that time, but how can you reapproach them at a later stage and prove the growth that you've had and why you might be worth being reconsidered, which is kind of where I help people with as well. So there's kind of my top tips there on how to pitch to those retailers. And also, if you're working with retail partners, it's how can you strengthen those as well? I work with a lot of brands on kind of really helping them look at their key retailers. When you're working with a big retailer, there's lots of other brands popping up around you all of the time. So you can be there, and actually if you're not constantly innovating and driving activations and marketing within that retailer, and also you doing a lot of that yourself, then you will be potentially losing sales and can start to decline as well. So it's really important that you're trading the business with your retail partners. So that's being really strategic with them, going to them with lots of ideas about how you can help build the business, what you can do to increase sales, how you can do marketing events in collaboration with them, potentially in their store, potentially online, or potentially be driving traffic to their website as well. So really going with a plan of numerous different ideas to the buyer. So you can then have a very open conversation and almost a brainstorming session with them. It creates a lot more value. I used to see a lot of brands that had kind of come empty-handed and be like, okay, what are we going to talk about? But they'd want the meeting, but weren't necessarily coming with anything as well. So it's really important that you start to think about how you can increase your business with those retail partners. And actually, what I'm seeing at the moment is there's a lot of brands where they're having challenges. They've built something that's grown very quickly, D2C, and a lot of things they've had to change, certainly on their D2C channels. I've got a great client that's really had to change their advertising. They've moved completely over to TikTok now, which is great. That's been right for their customer. But actually they want to now create more of a brand. They want to create more of an emotive experience. They want to create something that's got longevity, because ultimately, if they don't get that emotional connection with a customer and it's a quick purchase just from a digital advert, that doesn't necessarily create the longevity of a brand. So we're really focusing on their positioning, their marketing, their USP. How do they create that standout? And as well as looking at kind of different marketing channels through D2C, it's looking, okay, who could your strategic retail partners be as well? We're also seeing more beauty retailers out there than ever. We started to see a consolidation online with the Hut Group buying Cult Beauty, and obviously Sephora, which launched yesterday with Feel Unique, which was hugely exciting. But then we're also seeing a lot of kind of, I suppose, fashion retailers getting into beauty because they see it as such a buoyant category where fashion is really struggling. So there's also a lot of competition as well. I helped Next get into beauty. That was a category that they're very strong on: fashion, home and kids, but they didn't have beauty, and it's a hard category to launch in a big way. We've seen flannels launch in a massive way outside of London, which I think is really exciting. They've got a great Gen Z customer. We've got Harrods that have launched H Beauty as well. Again, we're starting to see a real saturation of beauty retailers, and it's hard in the UK. There's a lot of discounting as well, which gets really competitive and can be challenging as well with your D2C channels. So that's why it's good to really think about how many retailers you're stocked with, which ones that you kind of want to trade with alongside your D2C business, but also how can you make sure you're not competing with each other as well, and making sure that both your channels and your retailer channels have a strong presence and a strong marketing strategy to be profitable. So positioning your brand to stand out from the crowd. I mean, your positioning in USP is absolutely crucial, and it's often the cause of stagnation or decline for a lot of big brands as new brands pop up, as trends accelerate and consumer behaviour evolves. I mean, my favourite example of this, and I think one everybody knows, is Charlotte Tilbury. I was at Selfridges when we launched the brand. It went to #1 in that beauty hall within 6 months, which was absolutely amazing. And it really shook all of the makeup brands up in there. And a lot of the big brands didn't understand why. Just why? They were like, oh, too busy scrabbling around, wondering what happened. But there was a number of reasons that that Charlotte Tilbury's was a success. That a lot of people don't necessarily kind of connect all the dots to see. And a lot of it was what was happening in the market, what was happening with customers, and how they adapted and how they created a business model to align to that. So it was with the rise of YouTube, and everyone was Googling how to create a smoky eye. The reality, everyone was Googling it, tried it looked like a panda. So there was a trend, but people couldn't necessarily do it. Again, founder-led brands were big, but actually backstage makeup artists, that kind of arena wasn't big at the time. I mean, this is almost 10 years ago now. But actually, when we worked with Charlotte, she was like, well, we want to launch in the main beauty hall. And we were like, yes, cool, but not sure enough people know who you are, which wasn't an easy conversation to have with Charlotte Tilbury. But then we did a whole preceding campaign to make sure people did know that she did almost every single Vogue cover, that she was best friends with Mario Testino, that she did know that she had helped Tom Ford create his makeup range, for example, that she did have the expertise. Because actually, if that hadn't been kind of publicised and talked about, people wouldn't have known she was an expert. They would just thought, oh, she's a makeup artist, which actually wasn't important to people at the time, but that really set the precedent for that. So that was the second thing. Both of those things was, one, what was happening in consumer behaviour, but second, how do you establish yourself as an authority, as an expert, and tell people that you are, in case that they don't know that yet. So that was another thing. She also simplified putting on makeup, which was amazing. She had 10 looks, the same person, and all that person looked different in every single look. So it made it very easy for a customer to go, I want to look like that person. And then there was a whole education, there was lessons involved. So how can you educate your customer as well? So that education piece was absolutely crucial. The way she positioned herself as a digital first brand, very very clearly, I'm a digital first brand, but she used Selfridges as a global platform to project her business forward, because she knew that would have a very fast way of positioning herself globally, and having access to kind of all of these customer base of customers that Selfridges have, and also give validation to customers that, wow, Selfridges have chosen this, it must be cool. So there's a series of different elements that she was able to do that kind of really helped her stand out, to position herself as that authority, to educate, and to really take time to teach people how you can look good, how you can feel good, and how can this makeup can really change your life, and how passionate she was about that as well. And a lot of that was about the trends that were happening with consumers, the trends on social media and what people were looking up, and also simplifying a solution. So really think about how you solve a solution for your customer as well. And I work a lot with brands on how they kind of reposition themselves, and it's not always about rebranding and new packaging and a new name, and people think, oh, it's going to be huge and I've launched this brand and now I've got to change it all again. It's not always about that. Sometimes it's a quick tweak, sometimes it's a little bit more, but so it's really thinking about how you kind of help the customer understand what you do. I see so many brands that are focusing on the factual element of a brand. There are so many vegan, sustainable skincare brands harnessing the power of plants. There are hundreds of those out there. Time after time, I'm seeing them. And I'm seeing a lot of people kind of smiling and going, yep, 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 seen a lot of those. All of those, they're all facts. And it's not a point of difference. It doesn't make someone go, oh, I need to find out what this is. And I've got a great guide here of some of the things you can start considering, which has also got some client examples as well of what we had before and what we had after. And ultimately, it's about creating some kind of elevator pitch where you can really create that emotional connection. So there's a great one on here that a indie brand called Monday Muse I worked with, and we kind of evolved her beauty brand that was quite fact-based to say, I can't remember off the top of my head now, something around cruelty-free skincare for not so well-behaved skin. So immediately, not so well-behaved skin, you think, oh yeah, well my skin's sometimes a bit naughty. Yeah, I need to look into this because my skin is not doing what I want it to do. So it creates immediately that emotional connection. And that's that hook that gets someone to then come in and be like, okay, now I need to find out more about this brand. So that hook can be so important. And it's about creating that elevator pitch, but then creating your mission, kind of creating your brand story about it through that as well. And how do you have all of those elements that you can start to weave in to your content, weave into your positioning, and be consistent with your messaging as well. People need to see a brand at least 7 times. It's probably a lot. I know it's a lot more than that, but I don't want to scare everyone. But before they start to even take action to look at your brand. So it's being consistent. It's telling people why you're solving their problem, and kind of that repetition as well. And it might feel like you're saying the same thing over and over, but honestly, you're not, and people don't always see that message. Okay, so how do you review your strategy and align your focus? There's always so much you can be doing as a brand. It's like, absolutely, where do you start? And the first starting point that I would encourage you all to do is think about the customer journey. I'm obsessed with the customer, and I think it's where you should always be trying to position yourself so you can better understand them, so you can communicate more clearly. But start to think about the customer journey. I always kind of start with a sales funnel when I'm working with clients, around 6 stages. Some people only use this as 5, but I always think it's important to use 6. So think about brand awareness. Think about, which is kind of that hook, that elevator pitch. Think about they're taking interest, they're engaging with you, they're looking at social media, they may have gone on your website. How do you give them more content, more information? How do you kind of get them more engaged with your brand? How do you educate them? Hopefully then there's a purchase stage. So they've purchased from you. Great. Now what? What's your great post-purchase experience for them? How do you retain them? How do you get to come back a second time? Because that's super, super important. And a lot of that can be done in a much more profitable way than that kind of, and quicker than that brand awareness phase. Going back to people need to see your brand at least 7 times before purchasing, or even kind of taking action. Actually getting someone to purchase again could be much, much easier and quicker as well. And then it's focusing on loyalty. A lot of people stop there. So getting somebody who's your loyal customer is amazing. How can you get them buying from you multiple times a year? But the most powerful one, and particularly I think in the current climate, if you've heard me talk before, I always talk about this, which means, and I'm still talking about it, which means it's more important than ever because I'm seeing it constantly from the clients I work with and from kind of brands I study and look at all the time because I'm a bit obsessed with it. But it's those brand advocates. It's that word of mouth. It's what was the last time you went for coffee with a friend and you were like, I like your lipstick, or oh, your skin looks good. What have you got on your skin? You're like, you got this. You're like, often you stop buying it on your phone right there because your friend's face looks amazing or they smell great, or that word of mouth. That it's so powerful. A lot of digital marketeers hate it because they can't quite track the ROI. It doesn't have a ROAS. And so that can be quite challenging and it can be quite difficult for the large brands, kind of with a kind of a board that wants to see data and numbers and exact figures. But actually that word of mouth, that referral, that old fashioned way of just kind of talking about things is super powerful because we all know we trust our friends. So if people are talking about a brand, it's got to be good. So I'd really encourage you to take 10 minutes, think about your customer journey and how much budget are you spending on each of these 6 areas? How much time are you and your team spending on it? And how much energy are you spending on thinking about each stage of this? I think we all get overwhelmed with thinking, I've got to post on social media, I've got to post on social media. Whether you have a brand or you don't, it's this constant, I suppose, pressure that we feel that we need to do to kind of be putting stuff out there. But actually, what could you do to nurture an existing client? Could you do to nurture a lapsed client? How can you start to segment these people? And that is super powerful. And what I would say is kind of in the current climate, as there's lots of changes, and I think there will continue to be changes, is just review more regularly. Put a note in your diary. Do it now. Get on your phones. It's really important. Carve out time for this when you've got time and you've got energy, because it's very easy to just get stuck in the day to day. So how do you help yourself kind of move through this and make those adjustments? And sometimes those micro adjustments, that just trying something new for an hour a month, could have quite a big impact on your brand. Okay. So that's me. Thank you very much. I'd love to have any questions if you've got any. Yes.
Sorry, microphone. Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing. My name is Shibu.
Yeah.
I founded a retail company in Nigeria.
Cool.
I manage the premium retail marketing of GHD Hair.
Amazing.
And I'm starting a new company.
Cool.
And I wanted to ask, you made a comment about building your brand before launching into retail as advice. But in the last few, I would say, years, because I also work in retail marketing, we've seen big successes with brands launching into retail from the onset. So if you look at brands like Bioma, they literally just launched in 1 week into Selfridges, Cult Beauty and Target. And they had such a strong start that it's kept on. And then like smaller brands like in America that had support from like Nordstrom, like Topicals, I don't know if you know it, the skincare brand, is one of Sephora's biggest brands right now. Nordstrom launched them from the start. So what would you say if you're pitching to a retailer would help you stand out if you don't have that founder presence, like before, if you've not founded a company before, to launch with them?
Yeah, and you definitely can launch with retailers with no D2C presence or anything. Generally, if you have got a huge launch plan mapped out. So if you go to the retailer and go, when we launch, we're going to do X, Y, Z. All of these journalists are going to talk about us. We're going to got this huge digital marketing plan that's going to drive everything to the website. There's going to be such hype as soon as we press go. And generally that has been mapped out. There's usually quite a big budget behind that as well. And there's a true gap in the market. I don't honestly see many brands that have a true gap. I'd probably see, So there's a lot of brands out there. There's a lot of brands launching, but it's about finding the gap in the market. Make sure you really do your market research, and make sure you then do the research with the retailer as well. So does that retailer have a gap? And then how can you demonstrate to the retailer that they have a gap, and that it's going to be they've got that gap, and it's going to be make loads of money. And that's the number one thing you'll kind of see on the guide as well. The number one thing that people forget when they're pitching to a retailer is what's the commercial opportunity. They say, here's what we're doing and we're unique because X, Y, Z, but they don't put any proof of concept or validation about why this is going to take lots of money. And actually you can have brands, I was at Selfridges, we'd have brands that wouldn't take any money some weeks. If there's not enough customer awareness outside, it can just not work. And there is also a misconception that from sometimes, depends how well you know the industry, that the retailer is going to be driving the business for you. It's about the brand driving the business themselves. So again, depending how much people know about the industry. Yeah.
So I think that's an excellent answer. But one thing I want to ask is, because you were saying that a lot of capital would need to back that kind of entry. What if, because obviously there's certain demographics that do not have access to that type of capital and will not get access to that type of capital. What would you recommend in those situations where there's an obvious funding gap?
Build a huge social media following before you launch. So that's my number one tip if you're ever going to start launching a brand. People wait until they've got the product and then they're like, I haven't got any customers. They've got to start from scratch. Whereas a great person that I met probably 2.5 years ago, she had something and I was like, wow, actually, I have not seen this before. This is pretty cool. So I was very impressed by the product. And she's been building for the last 2.5 years a social media following. And people are like, but I can't tell anyone about my brand or my product. You don't need to. She's talking about the category and she's positioning herself as an expert in that category. And she's talking about the problem that she will be solving when she launches that product. So when she does, she's been seeing all these people. She's got people on her email list. She's got people that will be amazing to talk about her brand when she launches. So as well as doing all the product development things, she's been building. She's probably got, I know on Instagram, she's probably got, I think, between 8,000 and 10,000 followers. And she's also big on TikTok. I don't know what that is off the top of her head. So as soon as she launches that brand, she's got customers and she'll have sales, because without the customers, you don't have the sales. Yeah. So yeah, social media is a hard but free way to do it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, can I just add something
Yeah.
to what you said? Hi, I'm Sarah, editor of cosmeticsbusiness.com. Well, you mentioned Bioma. Bioma didn't come out of nowhere.
No, I know.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh,
Yeah, because obviously there's like Tan Lux, Isle of Paradise and all that kind of thing. So yeah. Does anyone else have a question for Wizz?